Since the start of the pandemic, obviously from believing people, religious people, people of faith, there have been various responses to what is happening. We do that, we respond almost sometimes even unwittingly in order to cope with what is happening. So there have been a lot of practices as well as thinking around why this is happening and how we deal with it. Why, on the one hand, why is God allowing this? Why all the suffering? Why all the loss of life, of quality of life? Why all the pain, etc., etc.? And then how do we respond? How do we get out of it? How do we cope? How do we deal with what is happening? Now you know, just as well as I do, that behind all of that, or should we say underneath all of that, is the question who God is. Now, it is very possible that until around 18 months ago, you or I thought that God is like the ultimate superhero. God is the ultimate rescuer that will show up when we are in need, in crisis, and yes, in pain. But I think that you know that that is not the story of the gospel. It is not the story of the cross. You know, I remember years before, a few years before, and a few more years before, when we studied theology, for example, and we read about the fundamental changes that came about in European theology after the Second World War, after people were trying to come to terms with why all that suffering was possible and how to respond to it and who God is in the midst of all of that. And some of the best theology, as it should have been, as it should be, and as it should be now, came from people who took the cross seriously, who took the suffering of Christ seriously, and said, we won't have answers to why this happened, how it was possible that under the church's watch, under God's watch, this could happen. We won't find answers to those questions. But if we go to the cross and if we pause and do more than pause at the cross, if we stay at the cross and almost deal with the discomfort and the illogical nature of the cross, then we don't get answers. We don't even get a how to move on after this or during this, but we see who God is. We see the revealed God on the cross. Who is that? Who is that God? It is the God who suffers like you and I suffer. You know, if I were to, say, cut myself badly in the kitchen while cooking, who would I like to be present? I would like somebody to be present, somebody to help me, who does not get a fright at the sight of my wound. I know it's a clumsy and a silly comparison even, but maybe it's slightly helpful. I don't want a God who gets a fright when I am desperate. I don't want a God who gets a fright when I'm depressed. I don't want a God who gets a fright when I feel pain. I don't want a God who thinks it's weakness when I cry. I don't want a God who says, oh, just get over it, or I will fix it quickly, or soon, or one day. I want a God who is willing to be with me and stay with me. The other truth of the cross, perhaps the most important truth of the cross, is that God didn't die when death came. I listen to how we speak, how we describe the moment that our loved one dies or the time afterwards. We say we are heartbroken. Afrikaans, ons sê dis hartverskeurend. We say we don't know how we're going to put the pieces back together again. But the cross, Jesus on the cross, says that when death comes, death does not cause the death of God. This is a time where most of us have almost the luxury to revisit our core beliefs. And I do believe that this is a time for you and for me to revisit the core beliefs about pain and suffering, to accept perhaps again the big mystery. We won't know. We won't know why there is death, why there is pain, why good people die and bad people flourish, all those questions that we find so abundantly in the Bible and in life. Let's accept the mystery of life, but let us also welcome the great mystery with the capital M, the mystery of the cross, the mystery of Jesus on the cross. Why, God, do you have to let your Son die? Why do you not save your Son from suffering? Why did you say no to his plea the night before? Why? But thank you. Thank you for being present in the shadow of death. Thank you for being familiar. Thank you for not getting a fright. Thank you for being present when we suffer. See, this is part of the good news. It is part of the gospel. Let us thank him for that. Lord, you are the present God. You are the brave God, brave enough to be vulnerable, to become one of us, to suffer like we do, perhaps even more. We would much rather choose you like this now, because your life and your message and your presence now has more meaning and more significance than ever before. So this is my prayer for him and for her who is watching this and listening to this. May they welcome the suffering God. May they know that you are not scared of death, that you are familiar with pain, and that you remain present. Thank you that this is our biggest comfort in life and in death. The truth, the fact that we belong to you. May we believe it. May we know it. May we feel it. May we remember it. May we live from it. I pray that you will bless him with your loving, merciful, and kind presence. Amen.